for joining us, everyone. We are really looking forward to our conversation today about how to tell a captivating brand story that will convert into revenue. It's interesting, Lindsay and I reconnected a few weeks ago when we were talking about how we're both kind of in this exploratory mode with this narrative design technique and applying it to our clients' brand strategy and messaging. And the idea for this webinar was born out of that conversation. We've both been kind of lightly obsessed with the same topic over the last few months, so we thought we would share it with all of you. To fill you in, if you don't know, narrative design is a term that's been coined by video game developers to kind of describe this idea of bringing stories to life in a universe within their games. And it's starting to be applied to brand strategy and storytelling to kind of make a story interactive and invite prospects into a new world where they can thrive and find success. So it's a little more audience focused and much less company, brand, or product focused. For those of you who don't know me, I'll introduce myself. My name's Trish Thomas, and I'm the CEO of TEEM. We're a full service agency based in Denver, and we're built on a creative community. So we're kind of an alternative to a traditional agency. Our internal team handles strategic oversight and advocacy, and we source fabulous freelance talent for our clients on projects. And our client base ranges from, nonprofits, government institutions, B2B, B2C, the state of Colorado, Medtronic, Lifetime Fitness, and we also work with a ton of small companies. So we have a really great time working with our clients. And then I want to introduce Lindsay as well. Lindsay and I have known each other for a long time. Lindsay Yaw Rodgers is the founder of Raw Strategy. And they're a boutique content strategy firm that helps brands discover, clarify, and share their stories, building loyalty, trust, and connection. She's worked with large national and international organizations, and like us, she also works with a lot of small brands as well, but always helping to create these complex content infrastructures that leverage brand storytelling at scale. Some of her clients are big names like NBC, Twitter, the Red Cross, Toyota, the Olympics, and like us, like I said, she works with a lot of startups and small brands. So we're really excited to present to you today, and we're going to be sharing out a presentation deck and also the video recording of this webinar when we're finished. If you haven't used Zoom before, there's a QA feature at the bottom of your screen, and we're going to have plenty of time for QA at the end of the webinar. So please load questions in if something pops to mind as we're going through our presentation, and then hit us at the end with any questions you have, and we'll do our best to kind of take what we're teaching at a high level and help you apply it within your own brand or your own products. So why don't we go ahead and get started?
All right. So let's see. Oh, yeah, we'll skip over a couple of slides that we just went through. So I wanted to walk through sort of what we'll teach you today. And there's 6 fundamental things that we'll go through. And some of them are very foundational work where we're going to establish why stories work. Then we'll move into sort of the overarching question of what is brand storytelling? So what's sort of the point behind brand storytelling, and why is it important now? Why is it interesting now? Why has it come to the forefront now? And then looking at what the problem is, like why people and brands and companies are not using this, and are there barriers to entry and what they are, and then how we get around them. We'll also look at kind of the 5 goals of brand storytelling and narrative design, and using those as sort of the catalyst to create your own story and what needs to be involved. Then we'll kind of back into a little bit of what exactly is narrative design? What's the difference between brand storytelling and architecting your narrative design? Then we'll get into the last part that everyone I'm sure wants to know about, is how to use all this stuff. Where do we use it? How do we use it? And so we'll hopefully you guys will walk away with some tangible information at the end. Okay, so the first thing is, what is brand storytelling? So brand storytelling is sort of a popular term, as I said, at the moment in the marketing world. And the way we defined it is sort of the use of narrative to connect your values, your mission, and your sort of reason of being, or kind of raison d'etre in French, to the people who are or may become your customers. So sharing your story will give people that permission to believe in you and your mission, and also allows them to kind of map their story and their struggle and their successes and all that to yours. So as the second point says, the first point, humanity is sort of the new, what we call the communication currency. And so humanity has sort of become what is the most important connective tissue, or this kind of connective aspect between a brand and its potential customers. So, excuse me, showing the humility and the mistakes you've made and what you've learned and how you've learned them and why will sort of allow people to empathize with you and turn those people into advocates. Another way to say that is that sort of a brand story has become that connective tissue, but more so that kind of connective technology that blends the facts and emotions that your brand evokes. So it's very, very necessary for your customers to understand what this brand story is, for them to be able to actually connect with you. It increasingly has sort of become this, not a nice to have, but a have to have as you're looking at your marketing mechanisms and your marketing wheelhouse. This is sort of the basis and the foundation for all of that, because it will increase the visibility, your connectedness, your revenue, as we're talking about today, and the impact you have. So when it is deployed well, it will absolutely dictate the marketing strategy and hopefully create that captivating and profitable brand. So moving on to the next slide. So on the next slide, I'll get into a little bit more of kind of the science, but this quote says a lot, and I really like this guy. He's a professor. His name is Paul Zak, and he is a neuroscientist who kind of fuses this idea of economics and neuroscience. And so he studies a lot of stuff regarding how story impacts people and their reaction and what happens in their brain. So it says narratives that cause us to pay attention and also involve us emotionally are the stories that move us to action. And as a brand or a company or a service provider, this is really key. You want people to move towards action, whether that's purchasing or liking or engaging with you. So we'll move to the next slide, Trish. Thank you. Okay, so now we are in why stories work. So this slide sort of has 6 main points, and this is where I get into a little bit of the neuroscience. So our brains are sort of pre-programmed and designed to receive stories as this fundamental key to survival. They over millennia and years, they've sort of taught us all these lessons that we need to survive, grow, thrive, avoid disaster, all that stuff. So they do have the ability to connect us through this shared human experience. And they also inspire us, as we said, as the quote said, inspire us to take action. So in looking at some of this neuroscience a little bit more deeply, that guy, Paul Zak, who we talked about in the last slide, the neurologist, he has discovered that oxytocin, which is sort of this neurochemical in our brain, is activated, and it triggers when you hear stories, and it triggers these feelings of love and human connection and empathy. And so that is sort of the origination of why stories work in the first place. Excuse me. So the second thing is that when you release oxytocin, it actually triggers our brain to remember things. So instead of kind of spewing facts as a brand, if you tell a certain aspects of your product or your company through a story, the likelihood of your potential customers remembering that is a lot higher if you do it through story. The last thing is stories offer insights typically into something new that someone has never heard before. That actually triggers something called dopamine, and dopamine makes you pay attention. And so when you think about all these different aspects of stories, you are engaging them on a very human, basic level when you look at kind of how the brain works around stories. So you can keep going, Trish, if you want, to the next slide.
Trying to stay with you.
Cool, thanks. So as I talked about up front, there's a few problems when we look at how brands are interacting with stories, how they're using them. And as everyone probably knows, most brands do not tell stories very well because they really, really want to make sure that the data points and their solutions and all that is communicated. And they're afraid that sharing that through stories will dilute the power of whatever their solution is. However, that sort of makes the brand completely devoid of personality and loses connection with people. The second thing is saturation. Brands are really worried that there are so many brands producing content, and why would theirs be different? So stories intrinsically are unique to the brand and the person. And so they allow you to say, okay, no matter what, this is different than what anyone else or another brand is putting out there. So the third thing is brands do not connect emotionally with their tribe. And what happens here is you sort of, what I say, leaving this connective capital on the table. You are not capitalizing on this ability to connect with your consumers and then turn that, or I'm sorry, your audience, and then turn them into customers. So these are the three kind of main problems that brands face. I'm going to go to the next slide, Trish. Thank you.
I got you that time.
Thank you. So the question is sort of, how do you fix those? So what I like to coach people on, and I think Trish would agree, is that you want to hit these 5 goals every time you're looking at creating your own story and your own brand story. And one is you want to kind of help your audience, what I say, survive, belong, and thrive. And so these are sort of these like fundamental human attributes. But you want to ask your customers questions like, you want to get in their head and how did they know that? And there's a lot of questions that I think are preemptive to understanding how you set these goals. And so these can be sort of physical, emotional, intellectual, or just kind of the systems and the problems that they're having in their business or personal life. The second thing is you want to be really, really clear on what solution you're offering and what expectations you have in return for whatever you are offering. So if expectations are not really articulated up front, then you sort of run the risk of disappointing your potential consumer or client. This ties back to sort of the goal number 3 ties back to the first goal. And that is that you want to be really clear on what specific challenges there are for your customer. You want to name them right up front. You want to be really clear, and you want to talk about it in your stories, because one of the defining characteristics of a story is conflict. It's very different than just marketing. So conflict is that one kind of main aspect that you want to make sure you're articulating very clearly. Then you use this as a catalyst to describe your solution. So goal number 4 is the plan. So you want to have a plan that is prepared to answer the question of, okay, I'm up against this challenge. Now here's the plan that we are articulating. Obviously, all this is getting articulated through story, but you want to act as sort of their guide and their savior, so to speak, and you swoop in with a plan and an offer for them to engage with you. So that could mean you have 3 price points and you talk about the value of each in an easy way to sign up. That's the plan. It's you eliminate the barriers to entry on your plan. And lastly, and this is sort of key, is you want to be able to show the transformation of what is and what could be. So those are the questions you want to ask about your customers. What is their current situation? What are they up against? And then with your solution, with your plan, what would their life or their business look like after you? And then I'm going to hand it back over to Trish to talk a little bit more specifically about narrative design and how this is sort of the new method to create a really compelling brand story that's different than what we have done traditionally.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we can all agree, and I'm sure a lot of you on the call, you've either dealt with dealing with storytelling for your own brand, and you've been through these exercises and kind of the formula of product positioning or building a brand story. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think some of those approaches have become pretty formulaic. I think customers know what to expect. I think brands kind of follow an equation, usually chasing market research and direct data, but a lot of it's not very aspirational or inspirational or, to Lindsay's point, infused with some transformative future state that you're kind of inspiring people to want to enter into. And so, one of the things that we really wanted to reiterate is that even if your product or service is better, you can't necessarily just say it in the archaic way. I think that, like this quote kind of alludes to, by creating a compelling story, you really earn the right to tell people about what it is you're selling. You show them a future. You show them where they fit in that future state. And you show that you can really make an impact on their life. So I think that that's critical to what we're talking about today. I think this ability to describe a different world, to kind of develop the rules, the characters, and the possibilities that exist in a space, it applies to brands as well as games. Honestly, it creates an analogy for presenting your brand in a fresh way, telling marketing stories. And what Lindsay and I were really getting into on our call, and we want to talk about and kind of apply to some of your brands at the end of the presentation, is how those marketing stories really apply to building a brand, the same way that a core story and the design of a world enables a video game to be played and to happen. Narrative design, like product positioning, is a communication vehicle that helps a brand tell a story. But outside of that, they really couldn't be more different. This idea of positioning versus narrative design, one of the things that I wanted to share was that they aren't mutually exclusive. With a lot of clients we're beginning to work with on narrative design projects, we still do positioning for their products or services. It's still important to understand who your audience is, what their pain point is, how your product or service addresses that, and what the call to action is for them to engage with you. So there's nothing wrong with presenting that. But I think especially at the brand level, designing a narrative and having a story that you can tell year after year, that's kind of evergreen and always true, is really important. And then positioning can layer on top of that and adapt as you modify a product, as you launch a new service, as you announce maybe a new direction for your company. So the product or service messaging ends up manifesting through the lens of this larger narrative. That's a bigger conversation with your audience. I wanted to just kind of, at a very rudimentary level, explain sort of how some of our different vehicles work differently, and why they affect us so differently. A book or a written piece, as you could say, it could also be an article. It shares usually a singular idea over time. What has come into play with movies and other types of experiences that layer on new dimensions is that we've added a sensory experience to that idea that's shared over time. You're not just reading it, it's not flat. It's engaging your sight, your sounds. But when you get into a game, what changes even over a movie you sit there and you passively watch and you enjoy and appreciate. But games are interactive. They pull you into the story. They give you the opportunity to help kind of set the direction or change how you're playing the game or modify your own character. And what this new approach to narrative design is really doing in the realm of brand storytelling is pulling the prospect, the consumer, the customer into that world and showing them how they can behave, they can change their life within it. So I think that element of interactivity is really crucial in narrative design, that it's not just about you. We built this thing. It's going to make your life better in this way, and you should buy it. It's more about, what do you want? How are you going to leverage this to improve your lifestyle, or to impact your business, or to make more money, or to whatever you want to accomplish? And how are you going to interplay with the product or service in a different way? So hopefully some of that grounds you a little bit more than even the neuroscience component, and how narrative design manifests and what makes it different from kind of what we've been doing historically over the past few decades. So we laid out this chart to really outline what are the differences between product positioning, that traditional game, and narrative design, this new game? And so we don't have to go through this in a huge amount of depth. You'll see it when we send it out after the webinar, but I'll hit on some high points. I think product positioning is very pragmatic. It gives content, structure, and understanding to a solution. Narrative design is really intended to build a universe in the minds of your audience, a universe that they want to participate in, that they want to engage with. Product positioning is very good to help you win in an established category. So let's say you're releasing something that's at a lower price point, or it's just faster or better, but it's a very well understood marketplace. Product positioning still works well there. You're stating your benefits, people understand what they're getting. It's a pretty straightforward pitch. But narrative design works really well for new categories where you're really trying to do something that's more innovative. Maybe you're reaching out to a marketplace that's not familiar with the solution you're even proposing. They may not know they need it. Narrative design is a great way to get them excited about brand new categories that they're not familiar with yet. Product positioning cues up a sales cycle. It communicates a value proposition, and it lets you start to engage with prospects and pull them in for a buy. Again, kind of like with creating a new category and getting people excited about it, narrative design works very well to shorten conversion cycles and to get people to just dive into something, to get engaged with it, to want it, and to say yes to it. Product positioning is focused on your customer has a problem, you're the solution. Narrative design is all about shifting human behavior and helping people understand how your product or service is going to actually be transformative for them. This idea of pulling them in, letting them make choices, letting them engage or change their environment or take on some power is what narrative design is all about. Kind of building off of that, product positioning pinpoints concrete pains that buyers already have and exploits them. Kind of tapping into the new category or the very imaginative or innovative product or service angle. Narrative design works incredibly well when you need people to see themselves as a winner or a loser, to accept that a reality is right or wrong. To kind of view your product or service as having very serious stakes behind it. So less about something that's very commoditized. I'm thirsty and I need this drink, but things that are a little bit more complex and a little bit more life altering are very amenable to narrative design. Placing the prospect in the story and making them kind of see themselves living and breathing every day with what you're offering them is crucial to narrative design. And I think the whole idea of tribe that Lindsay touched on a few slides back is critical also. That you're building a club of adopters who kind of see themselves together as a unit. They can celebrate themselves and their wins. Brands that leverage narrative design, that are healthy lifestyle brands, they tend to have very robust online communities, very passionate groups of fans and followers. It's less about just making a claim or launching a new feature or function. And it's much more about getting people very emotionally and viscerally invested in what you've created. So I hope that that helps kind of distinguish between the old way of doing things and the new game, the new way of doing things. And we're going to actually give you some tools to kind of help you take this and run with it on your own. But this simple grid can probably help you determine if your brand, your product or service is really primed to utilize narrative design and ways that you might be able to use it to convey your story. All right, back to you, Linz.
All right, thanks. Okay, so now we're getting into some kind of fundamentals of how a story is structured. And what's interesting is if you start, once you know this, you're gonna see this absolutely everywhere. Every book you read, every children's book, every adult book, every movie. I'm sort of ruining everything for you right now, so my apologies. But it's really interesting to see when you get into the nuts and bolts of it, how every story is structured. So first, you have this tension. There's an obvious tension. It's what I talked about earlier, where you have this main character, and I'll talk about this in a minute. The main character is not you. It is your customer. and they want something that they can't have. So that's sort of the beginning. You have to identify, okay, who's the customer and what is the thing that they cannot have. The second thing is the conflict. And that, as I said before, is sort of the distinguishing factor of a story, of a narrative, is that there is conflict and that you see this arc of overcoming that conflict. So your customer or your hero, if you will, they face a challenge that is standing in the way of them getting what they want. And in this case, it could be revenue, it could be sales, it could be whatever that is of your customer. The third thing is that turning point. So there's a time when they learn about this new thought or a new plan, or in your case as a company, this is when you become the guide. So this is when you say, okay, this is when I have the plan. This is when they're up against this conflict. I'm going to provide this turning point. I become the guide. In which case we enter stage number 4, which is this call to action. So now this character has a conflict, but then they have this turning point, they meet someone or have a plan, and then there's call to actions, which will get them over, either it will get them to failure or success. Obviously you want to be on the success end of those things. And number 5 is when that character sees this new normal, like what has happened, what is the transformation that they have experienced, and that is what you want to aim to articulate as a company. Okay, so where do you live in this? As a company, even as a solo service provider, you could be a photographer, you could be a consultant, you could be a massage therapist, anything. If you are doing any sort of messaging, you need to understand kind of where you are and where you live in your customer story. So the main character, as I mentioned, is not you. That is your customer, the people who you are serving. As a company, you want to know what the pain points are of the people that you are wanting to serve. So they could be their challenges, their pain points, what they're looking for, and also sort of articulating, like, what do they have to sort of defeat to get this transformation? So, and then that's where you come in, as I said in the last slide. The turning point is when you arrive in this articulation of a narrative. So you give them a story in which they can see themselves and they begin to trust you. Then you provide the plan, the call to action, and articulate the new normal. We can go to the next slide. So where do you start? And this is where we get into sort of the step-by-step action plan for you. If you are, again, either a service provider, a company, it doesn't even matter how big you are, how small you are, if you're a one-person shop or getting up to, a medium-sized company, you have to go through these steps to start creating your own brand story. So the first one is you want to start with your customer, as we both have mentioned multiple times. So you want to research really specifically kind of how do they talk about their pain points? How do they talk about the conflicts that they're experiencing? It will really, once you understand the language and the kind of how they think about their challenges, it can really help you articulate the messages, and you can attach your story to in using the words that they use, and not only the language that they use, but kind of the sentiment and feeling behind it. So the second thing is define what your customer's life will look like if they do not get what they want. So that's the key second. Don't kind of take on your solution. Where will they be? Will they just kind of be stuck in wherever they are now? And this is all worth writing down, and we'll give you kind of a takeaway at the very end to do this. Step 3 is write down what they want and what they don't have now. So is it higher revenue? Is it like a more frictionless process to something? Is it a cool drink on a hot day? What are those things that they want? Step 4 is define what their life would look like if they do get what they want, like we've talked about before. But I would write this down, actually going through and writing this down. And this could be multiple things within your company. If you're a solo service provider, you could say, what are the things that I give them that will allow people to get over this hump? But I would write them all down so you can then, in the next steps, attach a specific story to that. And lastly, write down or somehow articulate who or what is getting in their way. So is it not enough time? Is it not enough money? What are the things that are not allowing them to move forward? Thanks, Trish.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is sort of the key next step. So how to use your story. This is the thing everyone wants to know. So there's a couple steps that I want to walk you through that are important, and there's a little bit of upfront work to understand, okay, what is my story? What's interesting? How do I identify those particular moments in our brand history, in our personal history? Why are they interesting? And then mapping those to your actual messaging. So a lot of people say to me, and Trish, I'm sure you get this too, is I don't really know where to start. I don't know what's interesting. Why would other people care? Those are some common questions that I get. And so this sort of, these steps sort of help you kind of extract and discover parts of your story that are compelling. So what I like to do is tell people to go find your, what I call UDMs, like unique defining moments. So if you're talking about a specific brand story, it would be, you know, what were you frustrated by when, you know, you're working for X company? Why did you leave that company and start your own? What were the challenges when you were starting this company that you just started? You know, if you're a service provider, it's, you know, why have you changed or pivoted your service that you provide to be what it is today versus what it was 10 years ago? If there are, you know, what's wrong with your industry, for example, if there are things in your industry that you don't like, what are those? And why did those compel you to actually create something that people want? So it's finding those unique defining moments and writing them down. Second thing that you want to do is connect those to these universal themes. And what I always like to say is the more personal the story, the more universal the story becomes. And so if you articulate your personal challenge in arriving at the company that you have created or the service that you have created, people can connect to that. They have felt that too. They understand, like, oh man, I've been there. That sounds like something I would do. And it really connects them to your potential customer and to the experiences that they're having. So you want to think about, if you have those unique defining moments, what are the kind of universal themes that everyone would probably be able to experience? The third thing is you want to map your story to your customers' challenges and successes. So this definitely connects into step 2, sort of that universal theme. But you want to get in a little bit deeper and say, okay, now we have the universal theme. Next step is, what are the specific experiences or challenges that your customers are having? And you want to attach, I mean, literally, I have these things written out and I'm drawing lines connecting these things for clients. And it's really helpful to actually have a physical map to draw this out. So that's step 3. Step 4 is when you get into creating a really specific content calendar. So now that you have the map with everything drawn together with the defining moments, the kind of universal themes or truths, this adding the specific challenges, then you put all that into a calendar. And another question that I get frequently is, you know, where do I share my story? What platforms do I use? What's the mechanism that I use? And it's sort of, I hate this answer sometimes, but it sort of depends on your company as well as your interests. You know, if you have a very visually driven company, you know, Pinterest is a great place. If you have, you know, a more kind of tech company, then, you know, something like Instagram, Facebook might be a good option, or LinkedIn. So it sort of depends on what the channels are. But the main thing you need to focus on step 4 is calendaring everything. So you want to create a content calendar so you have this map that is tied to your actual tasks. And that's really important for actually taking action around this. You can do it month to month. You can do it 6 months in advance. I always like to batch content. So once you have this kind of main map, I like to batch the content, have a brainstorming session about what specific blog posts and you know, Instagram stories, etc., will support that universal theme. You map it out, and then all you have to do is literally look at your map and you execute every single day. And then I'm gonna kick it back over to Trish, because she has a really great canvas. She calls a storytelling canvas that is it's a great tool to use as kind of a beginning exercise in creating your brand story. And I'll kick it back over to you to explain more.
Perfect. And I'll let you guys know we're about at the end of our presentation. So if some questions have popped to mind, or if there's stuff you want to talk about, pop it in the QA feed, and then we'll chat as soon as we're finished going through the Canvas. Yeah, this is a tool that we kind of modified from a kind of traditional script writing story arc for TEEM to work through with our clients. And I wanted to share it with all of you. If it's a useful tool for your own businesses, you know, use it at will. But it's kind of a way to just visually put it up on a wall and work through all the components of building a narrative design that then lets you sit down and craft a story, having all the pieces and parts assembled in one place. So the kind of three grounding things that we start with before we even get into the story are describing the world. You know, what is the universe that your audience is inhabiting right now? What are they dealing with? What are they looking at? What's around them? Who's around them? And then what's the new reality that you're inviting them to enter? Let's take something super straightforward like a shoe. You know, people don't actually just buy a shoe to buy it, to have a foot covering. There's something that they want to accomplish by having that particular shoe. If it's a fabulous lightweight running shoe, then you want to describe the current universe where maybe they have foot pain, maybe they don't have the padding they want, maybe their shoes are heavy and are slowing them down or altering their gait. And then the new reality is one where they're running like a gazelle, you know. Establishing goals, I think, is really important. Every story isn't designed to sell. And I think Lindsay's probably dealt with this too. Every single thing that you push out can't be salesy. So I think you do need to determine for each story, what do you want to accomplish? And if it's truly a larger brand narrative, it might be respect. It might be understanding of your brand. It might really be around brand equity and advocacy more than closing an individual sale. That may more live with your product positioning. In some cases, if your company's super straightforward, your brand narrative could be your main sales tool, but just think about that. Like, what do you actually want to achieve by telling the story? And then the audience. I mean, Lindsay touched on that, and I just cannot state this enough, that narrative is about the other person. It's about the recipient, the listener, much more than it's about you. So who's your audience? What are their needs? Why are they going to care about this story at all? And then in the lower portion of the Canvas, you'll see that we've kind of walked you through those phases of a traditional story arc, you know, that we're all used to seeing, but framing the scene. What is your audience thinking, feeling, wanting? What have they experienced coming into your story? What are the issues that they're facing? State your problem, you know, share your ideas about what you're trying to impact in the world. The rising action, what steps or actions occur that are actually going to get someone engaged with your product. And this rising action and making your point is really that turning point, that tip of the arrow that Lindsay was talking about a few slides ago. And then you want to share that aha moment. What's the epiphany? What's the climax of the story, the key takeaway? That place in the person's life where purchasing from you or engaging with your brand or taking the action that you want them to take is transformative. And then, of course, at the end, and this is what's a little bit different from maybe a traditional story, you actually want to invite their participation. You don't just want to share knowledge or get them excited or make them love the tale that you're telling. You want to pull them in and give them a call to action. Sometimes it's purchasing. Sometimes it's signing up for an email. Sometimes it's consuming a piece of content. Sometimes it's sharing, you know, their experience with you, with somebody else. But what is it that creates that interactive component that we saw on the grid that transforms this from a two-dimensional experience to a three-dimensional experience for them? And then I think it's important, it's less relevant actually in the story, but it's important for you to think about the denouement. What does your audience think, feel, know, or experience after the story? Because stories really are devised to leave us in a different place. You know, if you've watched a horror film or something, you're supposed to be scared at the end. If you've watched you know, a love story where one of the love interests passes away, you're supposed to be weeping at the end. So when you get to the end of your story, what is it that you want people to be feeling? Who is it you want to leave them as? So anyway, we just wanted to share this tool and kind of give that to you to use. And again, it will be with the deck that we send out afterwards. So I'm going to stop sharing and would love to just talk a little bit more now that we've introduced you to narrative design, kind of walked through some of the key foundational elements of it, shared how to create the exercise and kind of go through the motions. We'd love to kind of talk with you a little bit more about how to apply this to your brand. And I know that that really is where the rubber meets the road. And like Lindsay said earlier, a lot of the questions that we get are very specific about, you know, what do I do in a certain situation, or what do I do with my company or my product? And I think that this is your chance to kind of make it personal. Lindsay, one of the things that I know has come up a lot with TEEM is this idea of content calendars being driven by the urgent. They're driven by the news that's coming out of the company, whatever's going on in the current like societal or cultural scene or in the marketplace. How do you, maybe we can talk about how you create a story arc that's kind of timely. How do you take people through the different elements of telling a story in a content calendar without making it feel like this infinite circle where they're constantly going back and then coming to the present and then going to the future? I think that would be a great place to start.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot there to sort of unpack. The first thing that comes to mind is a lot of content calendars are sort of thought as a nice to have, not a have to have. And in that, they become this really reactive resource for brands where they say, oh, we need to have a content calendar, and then it doesn't get attached to a particular goal in the company. As you said, kind of right in the last slide, you really need to attach why you're creating this narrative, why you're wanting to connect with your audience, what your goals are as a company, and you have to attach those to this narrative. And so it can get a little bit tricky on how you go kind of back into the past, but what I like to always attach it to is if you do have sort of this defining moment, you attach a lesson to that. In a defining moment, if you think about a defining moment of as sort of an umbrella or sort of a tent pole, then you look at what happens underneath that. So there are a lot of different kind of narratives that you can attach to that defining moment, and you can use those over time. So I think what's really, really critical to your point is creating the goals right up front, where you say, okay, our goals and then in Q2 are this, and we're going to attach these 3 narratives to that, and we're going to tell them for 3 months. And then Q3, once we see how people react to that, we have this different goal, and we're going to attach a narrative to that. So I like being a little bit more proactive instead of reactive to creating that content calendar, so that you have sort of a full picture. And obviously these change, right? Like you think you're going to do this, and then you see how people react to a certain piece of content, you have to go in and change the whole thing. That happens. It definitely happens. But I think the idea is you don't want to just be throwing darts every single day and thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do today. I don't really know why we're doing that, but attaching it to a specific goal.
Yeah, I agree. Especially as just content marketing and social media, they're just so ever present in all of our lives. It's harder and harder to stand out, and not just be part of the noise and actually have something to say. And I agree with that kind of scattershot reactive approach of just what did somebody else say, and I'm going to ping out a response to it. That's really gotten overdone, and I think it's less and less effective, and we'll continue to see its effectiveness eroding over time. This is a good question. What do you do with content that's kind of evergreen, that, like, say, blog content that lives on a website and it's not part of kind of a running conversation out there in the social media realm or something like that? It seems like that might be a difficult place to tie a narrative to. And I know that we deal with that a lot. How do things anchor back to a point in the brand story, but not be stale a year later when they're still living on the blog? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. Is one, I think if you do a good job up front of planning in terms of, let's say, a full year goes by and you're creating this idea of evergreen content, from a block and tackle standpoint, it's actually not too bad from an SEO perspective to have that content on there. But if you want, you can go back and change it a little bit, and that can also help your SEO a little bit. But I think there is a place for evergreen content, and that what I would do is tie that back up to an actual goal. And so this is getting a little bit more into the product positioning side of things, because I think you do have to have a level of your content that services your products and services exclusively. So it is, yeah, so it's sort of like promoting and supporting what you do, explaining what you do, and not necessarily leaning as heavily on the why. Because as you've talked about too, the narrative arc ends up being a little bit more of the why behind the brand. And so it helps articulate that. With some of this evergreen content, it leans less heavily on the why and a little bit more on the what. And so I think there's a time and place for that evergreen content to support the products and services that you actually have. So I actually think that you can have both.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that kind of goes back to that, when does product positioning make sense? When does narrative design make sense? And how do they kind of intersect to create a holistic, kind of brand messaging infrastructure?
Right.
Another question, because narrative design is it's very helpful in terms of creating user-generated content, UGC. How have you and Raw typically helped people kind of leverage storytelling and that emotional component, that human component, to inspire fans and followers and customers to engage and start to push their own brand content out?
This is where there's some heavy lifting involved at the very beginning of creating your story. And what I mean by that is I always suggest to brands and companies to interview their potential customers. Let's say it's almost like an old school version of a focus group. So you'd almost want to create this focus group and you ask them really specific questions that focus on their experience of whatever that thing is. So if you're a service provider, or let's use your shoe example. If you put 15 different people in a room who are interested in a running shoe, really listening, asking them key questions, but really listening to their answers and writing down how they talk. What words are they using? What phrases are they using? What are they afraid of? What are they aspiring to do? And then using that to actually leverage your brand story. You sort of answer that. And so in your kind of engagement side of things, when you're creating content, you can use that to say, oh, we know you guys are obviously having this experience. And as soon as you articulate something that people really, really feel and have experienced themselves, people see them in your shoes. Well, that's a Chanel's just said shoe, but they see themselves in that experience. And that's what connects to them, is being able to see themselves in that. So I think really thinking through what are our connecting points, and that in itself allows for engagement. And it doesn't always have to be engagement in the form of comments and likes. I think there's sort of this intangible engagement as well when you look at narrative design and stories, that is a very emotional response. So if I use this example sometimes where I recently have had my little son has just damaged himself left and right, in the hospital, doing all these things. When I describe the physical nature of what has happened to him, everyone sort of curls up and does this. And that's what you want to evoke with a brand. And so you not the curling up thing, but you want to evoke emotions. But you want to evoke emotions. And so I think making sure you think through, okay, what am I evoking in the people that I'm trying to go after? And in that, they will engage with you emotionally, which is the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. We have time for just another question or two. So if you have one, pop them in the Q&A. But that kind of brings up for me, Lindsay, the notion of resonance and dissonance. And I think that narrative design is all about resonance. It's all about hearing a story and feeling emotionally attached to it and feeling like it has relevance in your life and feeling drawn to it. And I think sometimes in the traditional kind of product positioning, pains, gains, benefit statement, things like that, you lose that. And I think even as we've been so inundated with sales messaging and marketing and advertising just at a level that we've never experienced as human beings before, you feel some innate dissonance with an in-your-face sales pitch sometimes. I know I do. And I say that running an agency, that there are things that just make me cringe. You know, I don't want to be around them. Nothing about them compels me to engage with that brand. It's off-putting. And so I think keeping in mind that idea of resonance and dissonance with your audience is really important, because you want to stay in the resonant zone. For sure.
I would agree. And, you know, I think there's an aspect where there's this blindness factor right now, where people have sort of become virtually non-reactive to sales pitches. And sales pitches can look a variety of different ways. They can look like banner ads. They can look like, you know, terribly written emails. They can look a lot of different ways, but I think people are so used to deleting both in their brain and on a website, but also just not paying attention anymore. And so you have to get people's attention by offering them something different. And a story, as we talked about, is intrinsically unique, because no one has ever had yours before.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Good question. Do we have specific companies or brands whose narrative design is on point today? So I don't know if one pops to mind for you. I have a couple that pop to mind for me, but
yeah, there's a couple that, so one is Warby Parker, the glasses company. They do a really good job of, and I like this example because it's not complicated, and what they articulate is their sort of origination story. And their origination story is, you know, hey, we were on a backpacking trip, and we broke the sunglasses on a backpacking trip, and we couldn't afford to get new sunglasses when prescription glasses when we got back to grad school. So we just suffered through grad school without glasses. And that was their sort of impetus behind the brand. But everyone's sort of been there like, oh man, I sat on my sunglasses and now I don't have the money to buy them, or, you know, whatever. So I think those touch points can be really simple. They don't have to be this like massive moment or you figure out the world. They can be these little moments that, oh man, everyone's had that are actually more effective.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a couple brands pop to mind for me, and some of them are kind of just part of the landscape, like Nike. I mean, they perennially have been a fabulous brand narrative and very engaging brand. They're a very interactive community, pull their fans in, do really compelling advertising. And so I think that they continue to do a good job. I actually think Dove's campaign for Real Beauty has been a really nice one. I've loved to see different skin tones, different body types, different hair, different just being pulled to the forefront. And I think it's very culturally relevant right now, very culturally aware. And there's some interesting kind of little niche-y newer brands that I think are doing a good job. Dollar Shave Club for guys. People love that freaking brand. I mean, and they do such a good job of just like inserting themselves into your morning routine and your shopping. Everybody hates to shop, and now with the coronavirus, shopping's even harder. But I think that idea of
too.
Yeah, they use a lot of humor
of sort of the satirical thing, like making fun of the experience that all men have to have, and so they're very, very smart with their brand story. I know Airbnb released their experiences side of thing instead of their stay with someone side of their brand, and they had sort of a timely, and this is where we kind of get back to your question about, how do you use kind of timely events like, Black Lives Matter movement or whatever. So they took this guy who lived in a very traditional setting that was not welcoming to kind of the gay community. And so they brought him on these trips to San Francisco, and they set up experiences, having dinner with, a very welcoming gay community. It was awesome, but they had this video of sharing his story. So it wasn't actually their story, but they were sharing his story as a way to provide context to why they were offering this new thing. So it's actually worth a watch. I'll try to put a link in the handout that we send out after, but it's a really compelling video.
Yeah, no, I agree. One other, some of these, I don't know, there's an interesting kind of nostalgia element to some brands that are doing narrative design well right now. I think of like Shinola, that's sort of bringing back some of these retro products and looks and feels and things like that. And you know, this is an interesting time where people are kind of longing for the past. I think having a little more reflection time, maybe reverting back to their childhood or their hobbies or their interest or things like that a little bit more. And there are some brands that are doing that really well. So yeah, those are some of the ones that pop to mind for me. Not that there aren't many, but I think those are some of the ones that you guys can find and track also. Does anybody else have a question before we're closed? We're coming to 5 o'clock, and really hope that this was helpful for all of you. Appreciate you logging in. And like I said, we're going to be sharing out the deck and the recording of the webinar afterwards. So feel free to push it out into the world to anyone you think it will help. And if any follow-up questions or anything come to mind afterwards, Lindsay's and my contact information is going to be in the deck as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're always happy to ping something out or support you in any way that we can. Anything else you wanted to close with, Linz?
No, I completely agree with that. Yeah, if there's any way we can support any of you, let us know, or you know, questions on this topic, or you know, how-tos of how you actually take this information and utilize it. We're happy to help. So reach out with any questions you have.
Absolutely. Have fun brand building out there. Thanks, everyone.